Right, I see a couple more people joining us. That is so exciting. We're glad to be here today, and I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. It's about that time. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Kendall Hub webinar, Corrections and Transformative Dialogues, Critical Thinking Framework to Foster Student Engagement. Students arrive in the corrections classroom. They've got diverse perspectives and questions about justice, healing, meaningful change. And this is a fantastic opportunity. You've got people who are eager to learn. So how do you take advantage of that opportunity for critical thinking that is just right in front of you? Well, that is what we are going to talk about today. But before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping things. This webinar is being recorded. You'll get access to that in the coming days. And then we will be taking questions at the end of the webinar. So if you have a question at any time, feel free to throw it in either the chat function or the Q&A. But we have with us today the wonderful Taryn Vanderpyle. So just a couple of words about her. Taryn's an associate professor of criminal justice at Western Oregon University. And the great thing about her is that she brings a lot of real world experience to her academic work. She spent over a decade working directly with people in the criminal justice system, focusing on what actually works for reentry and reducing recidivism. So her background as a special education teacher and a foster parent kind of gives her this unique perspective on supporting vulnerable populations because she's on the front lines of that. So rather than just studying these issues, she's actively working to change them through research, advocacy, and policy work. So, Taryn, super excited to have you with us today. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Megan. So, as Megan said, welcome to the webinar, Corrections and Transformative Dialogues, a critical thinking framework to foster student engagement. So again, my name's Dr. Taryn Vanderpyle. Like Megan said, I'm an associate professor of criminal justice sciences at Western Oregon University, and I'm also the co-founder of a nonprofit called Transformative Justice Community. My research, teaching, and nonprofit work all focuses on corrections, which I will tell you more about in a moment. But first, I'd like to thank you for joining me today to talk about how we can engage students in critical conversations about the difficult topics that are inherent to talking about incarceration and how we respond to harm. These are not discussions that we should shy away from or try to avoid. Rather, it's essential that we take a deep dive into what is complicated or confusing and can be uncomfortable. When we look at research on learning, it's clear that diving into these difficult conversations will lead not only to greater understanding and improved critical thinking skills, but also far longer retention of the information. Decades of research has shown that learning experiences connected with emotions lead to deeper comprehension for students and are more likely to be stored long term. So, in other words, when emotions are attached to something we learn, when we care about it and feel about it, we remember it. I'd also like to point out the design for this PowerPoint. It is festive for a reason. So I see the opening of a student's mind as a great thing to celebrate. So that's why these slides have a celebratory feel, even though we're talking about such tough topics. I'll tell you a little bit more about my background and how I've come to the point of advocating for change in corrections, or advocating for change in how corrections is taught in this country. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide, Megan. So many years ago, I was a high school special education teacher. I was only there for 2 years, and those 2 years completely changed the path that I thought I was on. I didn't see that coming. I worked with students with emotional and behavioral disorders, learning disabilities, oppositional defiant disorder, and other types of labels that are given at the school level for students who stand out in ways that most teachers don't enjoy. I saw many of them go in and out of the juvenile justice system, and I couldn't figure out which came first, the disorder or the system. The National Council on Disability published a report that said 85% of incarcerated youth have disabilities. 85%. That's compared to 11 to 12% of a typical school population. Something is clearly going on here, and I wanted to find out more about it. So I went and I got my PhD in special ed with a focus on juvenile justice. And for a while, my work focused on youth only. Then I got a call one day from a man who explained that he was incarcerated in the state's maximum security prison here in Oregon. He said they had a professor who was going to bring in students to an event but had to cancel. So would I like to come to prison and bring a group of students with me? And I jumped at the chance. That phone call was the beginning of my exposure to the adult punishment system. And it was far different from the juvenile system, and it awoke something in me that propelled me to get involved. I now conduct workshops and classes in the men's maximum security prison and in the women's prison here in Oregon. Throughout this webinar, I've included pictures of myself and lots of incredible folks who have played a major role in this work. They have taught me in ways no book or webinar or conference ever could. I learned the value of learning from people with lived experience and from multiple perspectives. And it is from this decade of going into prisons, talking with people who have both caused and survived great harm, really listening to victims and survivors, working with people when they are released, and navigating the politics around this unpopular population that I have formed all of my teaching and research. I have taught corrections over 20 times so far, updating it a little bit each time. And it's from this point of view that I conduct this webinar today. So everything I'm sharing today is supported in research and not just my hug a thug search results. The way we respond to harm in this country and the outcomes of that are explored across multiple fields of study, which also supports the notion of learning from multiple perspectives and experiences. Let's go to the next slide, Megan. So much like telling you where I'm coming from and why, students need the same introduction and foundation for being willing to jump into tough conversations. In addition to making your classroom a safe space to explore difficult topics, which is an important skill that could fill up a whole additional webinar, they will need to be prepared to look at punishment in a way most of them have not done before, and one that will be constantly challenging of what we have all been taught. It's also important to provide a trigger warning up front and let them know it applies to every class and every reading. This class covers some really tough things that might bring up some pain for them, and it's important that they take care of themselves throughout the term. Let's go to the next slide. Students need to know that their viewpoints are both valid and valued, and so are others. So far in their lives, like with most of us, many of them have learned from a singular or limited perspective or voices. If they will open up to learning from multiple perspectives instead, they will get a richer and fuller picture and much deeper understanding of what they are studying. It is extremely important at this point to assure students that it is not your goal to change their minds, but simply to open them. Half of the assignments in my course are used to check their new content knowledge, but the other half are a check-in of how they're processing this information. I let them know right up front that I do not need them to agree with me. I just want to know what they think and feel about what we've been covering in class and what they've been reading. I'm looking for genuine reflection, which means there are no right or wrong answers. Students can question and push back all they want. That is great. It means they're feeling something and they're thinking critically about these topics that are really difficult to wrestle with. That's a solid learning experience and genuine engagement with the material. Another thing that helps is to make it personal right from the get-go. It is very difficult to really think about the bad people behind bars if you can't relate to them. It's too easy to maintain an us versus them mindset or out of sight, out of mind approach to corrections. For the sake of this class, that wall must be broken down. To start this process, I ask students to think about something they are ashamed to have done or something they would be embarrassed for people in their lives to witness. I tell them to think of that thing, not to share it out loud. And imagine there was a video of them doing that thing. Now imagine there's a screen they had to wear every day, either on the front of their shirt or on their forehead, that showed a video on repeat of them doing that thing over and over again. everywhere they go for everyone to see. When they walk into a room, the video is the first thing people see. When they go for a job interview, on a date, try to make friends, go to church, volunteer, adopt a pet, rent an apartment, buy groceries, anything. It is the first thing people will see about them. Are they okay with that? How might that feel? I can tell you this is not great for spurring discussion because they're often very silent after imagining what this would be like. So I continue. I pose another scenario for them to consider. What if a student asked for an extension on an assignment that for some reason I later found out to be a lie? That tells me he is a liar. Every time I see him in class, I will think, what a liar. When I grade his work, I'll assume he cheated because he is a liar. If there is any group work in the class, I will caution the other students to be careful because he is a liar. When other faculty have him in a class, I will warn them up front that he is a liar and they can't trust his work or his excuses. When he graduates, I'll post on social media that he doesn't deserve it, didn't really earn it. When he tries to date, or even worse, when he gets married, I will warn the potential partners not to trust him and that he lies. Can't believe a word he says. And if someone contacts me for a job reference, I'll tell them not to hire this person because he is a liar. He is a liar and he cannot be trusted ever by anyone. Does that feel right? Should one label stay with him and haunt him for so long and in so many situations? Should one bad decision label him like that? Why? Or why not? Students will usually explain that because he did this one thing wrong, it doesn't mean that he's a bad person and shouldn't be given a second chance. This one bad decision shouldn't follow him forever. In this scenario about themselves and about the liar, I ask students if they believe they are more than the thing they are ashamed of and more than the worst thing they've ever done. Are they more than whatever negative label would be applied to them if everyone knew what they did? If they are more than the worst thing they've ever done, isn't everyone else as well? This is easier to accept when we are talking about small things. But what about when we talk about big things? Where do we draw the line? And should there be a line? There are many public examples of people who have committed great harm, who have changed their lives around and done incredible good. They have proven they are more than the murder or the robbery or whatever it is they did. And they've received public praise and attention for their transformation and for their good works. Are they the only ones who have the chance to be considered as more? What about someone who has changed but isn't getting public attention for it? What about someone who hasn't changed yet? Should we assume they are bad until they prove they are good? And what does it take to prove that? The notion that everyone is more than the worst thing they have ever done is the beginning of seeing the humanity involved in the criminal legal system and corrections. Rather than bad guys or monsters we don't want to think about or care about, we must see the humans instead. That means recognizing the humans who are incarcerated, as well as the humans whom they hurt, and the humans who work in corrections, all of them. Let's go to the next slide, Megan. I let students know on the first day that the entire class is focused on one overarching question. Next slide. How can we respond to harm without causing more harm? That is a question I pose over and over again throughout the term. They need to know that no one is advocating for us to turn a blind eye when someone causes harm. We all agree that there must be accountability for harm caused. I want them to keep thinking about what that response to harm could look like if the goal was not to cause additional harm. Next slide, please. That additional harm caused by our current system is something we will return to in every class. Students are often surprised when they learn that what is really happening in our system of punishment is different than what they thought. It is rarely what they've assumed, and it is certainly not what they've seen on TV. In this class, they should get a clearer picture of what is really going on, as well as the outcomes that are occurring as a result of what is going on. After all, this is a giant system with a 70% failure rate that typically leads to an increase in both the frequency and the level of violence of criminal offending. Is that what we want from the system that claims to be keeping us safe and making people pay for what they've done wrong? Next slide, please. This often leads to our next big question that will also come up multiple times throughout the term. Next slide again. Students, and most people honestly, have a hard time holding space for multiple perspectives on one topic. When we talk about more effective ways to respond to harm, people often think that means we're forgetting the victims. Nothing could be further from the truth. Victims and survivors should be at the center of this work, and public safety should always be the priority. Where we go wrong is believing that our current system is actually helping victims and making the public more safe. Next slide, please. Still, the anger and fear that drive our current responses to harm should never be discounted. Those feelings are very real and very important, and whatever a victim needs to help them heal is the priority. One hiccup here is to be honest about who we are picturing when we talk about victims and who we are picturing when we talk about offenders. The notion that these are two separate, distinct groups is incorrect. This is a false dichotomy that is easier to believe because it makes responses to harm straightforward. However, something that is important to recognize and remember is that almost everyone who has committed a crime was previously a victim of a crime. Of course, not every victim will go on to be an offender, but almost every offender was first a victim. There's a lot of overlap between those two supposedly separate groups that our system of punishment is not set up to recognize. Let me give you some examples. Consider a boy who's raised in a violent home where he observes his father be physically abusive to his mother and he is subject to the same abuse himself. We would consider him a victim until later in his life when he treats his own wife and child the same way because that's what he knows. Then he becomes an offender. How about a woman in an abusive relationship? Victim. Who steals for her partner? Offender. How about a gang member whose brother is murdered? Victim. Who then retaliates and takes another life from a rival gang? Offender. Finally, what about a woman who's being trafficked for sex? Victim. Who then kills her trafficker? Offender. She becomes a criminalized survivor, and there is no category for that in our system. Once we're honest about this false dichotomy of victims and offenders, we can better listen to what the victims and survivors have to say. What is it they want from this system that claims to be for them? Consider that the state takes over in the legal system as the victim because someone broke a social contract or law. Where does that put the actual person who experienced and probably continues to experience the harm? Does it help them or does it compound their hurt? If we are claiming to prioritize the victims, we better actually listen to them first. There's also the consideration of what our current system of punishment is like for those working in it. One example that shows the importance of helping our students look at corrections from multiple perspectives is the death penalty. They've likely done the exercise in high school or other classes where they debated the arguments for and arguments against capital punishment, but it's unlikely they have ever looked at the effect of the death penalty on those corrections staff who are responsible for carrying out the execution. Our current practices create another class of victims we maybe didn't even know about. Students need to learn directly from those who work in corrections to understand what it's like, as well as the great potential of this career path. Next slide, please. So building on these two tough questions, how can we respond to harm without causing additional harm? And what about the victims? We need to keep pushing students and ourselves to figure out what it would truly look like to hold someone accountable for the harm they have caused. Next slide, please. Is it locking them in a cage for decades and never challenging them to face what they have done, to learn and grow and change? Is being tough on crime by focusing on punishment only really making us any safer? Or does it create more victims? Is there something we can do instead to address harm and promote healing? What is often mistaken for being soft on crime, such as focusing on rehabilitation and personal transformation as part of true accountability, is proven to make society safer. So why don't we do that? Why can't we support that? Why might some find it hard to support that? The pictures on this slide are from a powerful journey I was blessed to witness of a young man who was incarcerated for a series of burglaries and robberies that he used to fund his heroin addiction. He came into prison young, angry, and broken. He was given a 14-year sentence and thrown in a cage to be warehoused. The only intervention he got was from those in a white supremacist prison gang. As a result, he did not face the harm he had caused, and he went on to perpetuate more harm against others inside the prison. It wasn't until many years into his sentence that he decided on his own to face what he had done and commit to change. He sought out his own rehabilitation and directed his own remarkable personal transformation. He chose to dig in until he could fully understand and come to terms with the harm he had caused. Sitting with what you have done, what you are ashamed of, and facing how you have hurt people is incredibly difficult. It is painful, far more painful than being warehoused and not having to think about your bad decisions. Taking an honest look at the harm you have caused is vulnerable and terrifying and has to be done in a place that is scary and unsafe and unsupportive of this type of reflection and growth. How might this type of deep, transformative work fit into holding someone accountable? Again, keep coming back to the question, what does it truly look like to hold someone accountable for the harm they have caused? I'm happy to say that the man in these pictures went through his own remarkable transformation and brought others along with him. He changed despite prison, not because of it. The picture of us on the left is from when he was in prison. On the right is from the day he was released. He's now out and continuing to advocate for healing, transformation, and genuine accountability. He chose to become a credible messenger and a change maker, and he is far more than the worst thing he has ever done. We all are. Next slide, please. There's also a lot of great resources that can help create a safe space and prepare students for difficult conversations. There are free videos, podcasts, webinars, and more. Next slide, please. I've provided links to many of these in the instructor materials that come with my book, the Corrections 360, a look at corrections from all angles. In this book, I made it a priority to include multiple perspectives from those with lived experience in prison, currently or formerly, from victims and survivors of crime, particularly violent crime, from people who work in the field, and from prison scholars. And I also made it a huge priority to have diversity among all the contributors in terms of their gender identity, their race, um, crime of conviction, their current role, etc. So more than a typical textbook, students will gain a well-rounded understanding of corrections. Next slide, please. In addition to including personal stories from each of these perspectives, I made sure anyone can teach this class and do it well, even if they've never been into a prison. With the book comes a long list of resources for instructors. There's sample syllabi for online or on-campus courses, those that last 10 weeks and those that last 15 weeks. There's lesson plans, again, for online or on campus courses with multiple options for each chapter. There are activities to use in class. There are case studies to dig deeper into certain topics. There are chapter outlines, lecture notes, and PowerPoint slides, plus test banks for each chapter. Then for students, they benefit from a study app that helps with preparing for exams. The book is also priced lower. Kendall Hunt worked with me really well on this, and I'm so pleased. It's priced lower than other ones on the market at $45 for the ebook and $65 for a printed copy. Also, another thing I put in there just for students is a box at the end of each chapter called Making Change. Students had told me they wanted to learn how to make a difference in specific areas that concern them. So the end of each chapter includes a way to get involved. Next slide, please. I would also encourage you to dig in and continue this critical conversation with colleagues, students, those in your social circle and your professional network, and with me. Next slide, please. Please reach out if you have any questions or would like to bounce around ideas, whatever it is. If it helps students' understanding of corrections and the humans in the system, I'm more than happy to engage. In fact, I'm happy to begin by answering any questions you may have right now. And I also want to thank you for joining me in this webinar and for your patience as we work through our technical problems. So, Megan, do we have any questions?
Well, first off, I'm really glad that we did get the PowerPoint working because it was so pretty. Well
So
done.
pretty, even though it changed some of the fonts. It was even prettier when the fonts were right.
Excellent. Well, I was really glad that something that you brought up right off the bat was the fact that your book is so user friendly. Because I think a lot of times, like, what's tricky is like, wow, like this sounds like a really great approach. Would love to incorporate this in my course, but I'm in the midst of, trying to plan a bajillion other things. And so realistically, how am I going to have time to completely rewrite my corrections course? And so I love how your title comes complete with just so many resources for both students and instructors to help make that something achievable.
Thank you.
Well, do we have any questions at the moment?
And while you're waiting for questions, I would say one of the reasons that I did that and that I was so thorough with the supplementary instructor materials is because that's what I needed when I started out in higher ed. And I
Mhm.
would want that if I was switching from one textbook to another, because like you said, it's recreating a whole course. So I wanted to make that as easy as possible. And I wanted anybody who doesn't have experience with this but gets assigned this course, particularly last minute, to have whatever they need to be able to do it well and to feel confident in how they're doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you see this design fitting in public education space or alternative high schools? This is a question from James.
Hi, James. Thank you for the question. You know, it's interesting. Yes, first of all, I have been surprised that the book has become popular in prisons. I didn't see that coming. Like I feel like they know what prison's like, and they don't need to learn it from a middle-aged white lady. But it turns out they've they've really enjoyed it, and they've turned it into having critical conversations there. So I think something like an alternative high school, first of all, it'd be really great for kids in an alternative high school to learn how to not be in that school to prison pipeline. They're the ones who are most likely to end up in that pipeline, right? Um, so the more they can learn about the system itself and about what accountability looks like, true accountability and true transformation, what that looks like, the better off they would be. The it's written and designed for with higher ed in mind, but it's not at such a level that it wouldn't be appropriate in an alternative high school as well. Thank you for that
Mhm.
question.
We've got a question from Kristen here. How do we incorporate current events in DC with the police into our corrections courses and conversations?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. That opens a can of worms. There's a lot of worms going on there right now. Um, I I love your question, and I love what you're thinking with that. And I would say most of the topics covered in the different chapters, there's something current and really relevant that could easily be included in a discussion or a specific activity, like saying, based on the reading that you did, let's look at what's happening right now and how does what you learned from the reading apply to what's happening right now? And is there a different way that we could be responding to what's happening right now, or a different way things should be handled? I love that you're thinking that way, Kristen, because it's that real life application that students want to know about. And I assume if you're a criminal justice instructor, that a lot of your students want to into law enforcement. So it's even more important for them to learn how to apply these these this humanizing lens before they go into law enforcement. And if they become corrections officers, that's incredibly important.
Excellent. Thanks for the question, Kristen. David has a question. What is the importance of having formerly incarcerated speaking in your classes, and also paying them for their lived experiences?
Oh, thanks for queuing me up with that one, David. I love having people with lived experience coming into my class, and I 100% agree with David that they should always be paid. When I have staff come in from corrections facilities and talk about what it's like to work in a prison, I don't pay them. Don't tell them. I don't pay them because it's part of, they're being paid by the prison system. It's part of their job. Like the prison arranges for them to come talk to my classes because they're trying to recruit my students. But somebody with lived experience to come and just like share this vulnerability with a group of strangers, especially a group of strangers who want to go into law enforcement, that's a big ask. When I have those guest speakers in, the students at the end of the term, when I say like, what is the most important thing you learned? Or anytime I ask that, they always, always, always talk about the guest speakers with lived experience, 100% of the time. 100% of the time. I try to have in multiple guest speakers with lived experience in any term so that students can be exposed to a variety. Um, I know that's not always possible for everyone, but folks like David can zoom into classes, and he's a wonderful speaker, so I would highly recommend him. I also in online classes, I have had the benefit of some guys in the prison recording videos for me so I could still kind of have guest speakers in my online classroom. I'm not able to share those with everybody because that's just kind of a favor that they did for me. But those things do exist. And there are all these free resources available. So on YouTube, you can still find people with lived experience talking about what their lived experience was like. And corrections1.com. Ooh, sorry if I have that wrong. It's in the instructor materials. Um, there's a lot of videos on there about what it's like to work in corrections. So that's an important perspective to bring in as well.
Excellent. Any other questions for us today?
Oh, TikTok. Good.
Um,
That's great. There's also prison TikTok. I think it's just a hashtag. You can tell. I mean, you've already seen how good I am with technology today, but um, I talk about that in the book that they can find um, different different videos on TikTok, which I've obviously never used. I don't know how to use TikTok, um, but the students can find different videos with. I, oh my gosh, I feel so uninformed right now with the hashtag prison TikTok, or even just putting in prison. There are different videos about food, different videos showing the cell and what that's really like. All sorts of really good stuff up there. And again, yeah, free. Prison, thank you.
Prison TikTok, criminology, prison talk. Excellent. Thank you, David.
See, David's
Um,
priceless. That's what I'm saying.
any other questions today? Oh, where can we get that report you referenced at the beginning?
Oh, from the National Council on Disability. I mean, I'm gonna put a link in the, or at least put the reference in
I was
here.
going to say we can also send it out with the recording when we
Oh,
get that
great.
finished too.
That would be great. It was from 2015. And I don't know if they've done an updated version. I'll look into that when we send it out.
Perfect. All right. Any last questions today? Oh, here we go. What advice do you give to those speaking to Department of Corrections in terms of facilitating this program shift?
That is different in every state. My and those of you who have done some work trying to change the culture within the Department of Corrections and with prisons know the challenges involved there. Um, what I keep coming back to is the human aspect, of course, but also what actually makes society safer. Their whole goal is supposed to, well, they claim it's rehabilitation, but it's supposed to be public safety, right? Like they are responsible for public safety. So if what they are doing is increasing the frequency and level of violence of people they're releasing from prison, that's not safe. That's the opposite of what they claim they are doing. They claim they are focused on rehabilitation to help people release back to society as folks we want to be our neighbors. But instead, they're releasing people. Okay, soapbox is getting taller and taller. Instead, they're releasing people who are worse than when they went into corrections. So, with a focus on public safety, and if we continue to make the public safety argument, I think make that's gonna push the needle more than saying like, but these are humans, which is still important, still really important. These are humans with value. Their life matters, and they are more than the worst thing they have ever done. That is still incredibly important. But if we are to push the needle, focusing on public safety and cost is going to be more important.
Excellent. How do you
Mm.
recommend responding to students who are hostile to other viewpoints and or being political in class rather than engaging in respectful discourse? This frequently happens in criminal justice courses.
Yeah, yeah, it does. Um, I think it's important to create a safe space to start with so that conversations like that are not tolerated. Hostility is not tolerated. It's okay for students to disagree with each other. And this is another thing we talk about right from the start, that it's okay to disagree with each other, but do so kindly and with respect. We don't have to change each other's minds. I am not responsible for changing your mind, and you are not responsible for changing mine. What we are responsible for is having open dialogue, having critical dialogue. One of the things that I do too is, as part of creating this safe space, is help the students get to know each other on kind of a silly level. So I open every single class with a question that has nothing to do with criminal justice and nothing to do with the topic we're talking about. Like, gosh, I don't know, what's your biggest pet peeve? Or what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail or had no fear? Or who's the best performing artist of all time? And that gets students talking on just like a peer level, just a personal, this is not intense level, and laughing and just kind of getting to know each other. That has led to them, first of all, being able to speak up during discussions, even when they're hard, and they're nicer to each other and they're nicer to me. I've only, I can think of two times in about over 20 times of teaching this class, two times where I've had to step in and say, no, that's too far. That's too much. We're ending that right there. And then I can redirect the conversation. Most of the time we can kind of talk through like, okay, well, let's look at what you just said there and what does that mean? What are some other ways we can think about this?
Mhm.
But if it goes too far, it has to be stopped immediately.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. And I think too, just kind of Christian's follow-up question is, those are great suggestions. Sometimes it's hard to know how to handle it in the heat of the moment. But I
Right.
like how you kind of put it out just like firmly but kindly, like, nope, the stop's here. We're moving on.
Mhm. And really, if they're so upset at what you're talking about, they can leave. The door's not locked. And you can ask them to leave. You have that right. Hopefully, it doesn't get to that point.
Excellent. Any final questions today? No? All right. Well, thanks everyone so much for coming today. Thank you, Taryn, for a wonderful presentation. Um, and just really enjoyed it. Learned so much about just how to have such a balanced approach. And I just love the line, like, no one's responsible for changing anyone's mind. You know, we're having conversations. And I think that's a really productive approach. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Kind of like I said, we're going to edit this recording and then we will send it out with that link to the study that Taryn was talking about. And we'll be following up with you soon. Have a wonderful day. Taryn, thanks again.
Thank you. And thanks, everybody.